My name is Mary Sue Barrett. I'm president of the Metropolitan Planning Council, and we're delighted to have everyone here today for the public launch of our Universal Mobility Report, case studies, and recommendations. I hope that perhaps some of you read about it yesterday in the Tribune, or perhaps in the Sun-Times, or perhaps in Cranes, or perhaps in the Daily Herald. We're delighted to have that interest, and it was also picked up by a number of national news outlets covering transportation issues and disability issues. So we're delighted for that early release, and especially that you came here today to learn more together, because it's going to take a whole constituency to work on these issues. Universal mobility, a term that you will learn more about, and hopefully we will all adopt and educate others, is something that is personally important to so many in this room, including myself. About 2 decades ago, I started to develop a visual disability that affected my ability to drive and made me even more dependent on the transit network. And I'm a big transit advocate, so no complaints there, but I really needed the system to work for me. So that is something that I can relate to, and I know so many in the room are affected by this, either yourself individually, or loved ones, or looking ahead to knowing that the transportation network has to work for all of us. It is also appropriate that we talk about this today because December 3rd is actually designated by the United Nations as the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. I don't know that we knew that when we selected today, so it's really it's fate that we all are here today having this conversation in Chicago, connected with others globally who are having this conversation. The Metropolitan Planning Council is an independent organization. It's been around for 85 years, and we do this work thanks to its support from individuals, corporations, and foundations. And so we're grateful to all of you who have been part of that network of idea partners and funding partners. Today was made possible, the report, thanks to support from TransDev, and today's event, thanks to the generous support of White & Company. And so we're really grateful to both of them. I'd like to give them a round of applause. You know us, we work as a metropolitan change maker, and so it's appropriate that we have elected officials and appointed officials representing all the different areas of leadership on the public sector side that we need to come together to move an agenda like this. Hold your applause, please, but I'd like to recognize the elected officials that are in the room. Representing Cook County, Commissioner Anaya. Representing the City Council, 3 aldermen, James Kappelman, George Cardenas, and Daniel Laspada. Representing the Illinois General Assembly, State Senator Dan McConkey and Representative Teresa Ma. Representing our regional transit agencies, RTA Board Member Bill Colson, RTA Board Chairman Kirk Dillard, and PACE Executive Director Rocky Donahue. Also representing the City of Chicago, Karen Tamley, who is the Commissioner of the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. Thank you to all of you for being our valued partners and for the other appointed officials who are also joining us today. Thank you for being here. You'll note that our program features the photo of someone who is very dear to me as a friend and to many, many of you in the audience as a friend. We would like to commemorate our gathering today to the leadership of Marka Bristow. Marka is someone whose presence I feel in the room today. We were very sad to lose her as a disability champion, but truly, because of the agenda that lives on in all of us, her work continues on. You know her as the founder of a disability advocacy organization that is known nationally, Access Living. She is also known at the international level for her work on the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was back in 1990 enacted. In 1994, President Clinton appointed her to the National Council on Disability, and the list just goes on and on, thanks to Marka's magnetism. She was also a co-chair of the ADA 25 Chicago Steering Committee, and has impacted our organization's leadership on these issues. I know that she served in the past on an MPC committee, really shaping our trajectory that brought us to do this work today. And we're particularly delighted that our panel is going to feature Access Living staff member Adam Ballard. So when the Metropolitan Planning Council embarked on this work and took on the challenge of understanding how people with disabilities and older adults navigate our region's transportation system, we were actually blown away by the stories that came at us. People were happy to share their stories. More people came to us with additional stories, really quantifying and dramatizing how difficult it is, ranging from difficult to impossible to reach destinations. Our paratransit options are limited due to many things: lack of sidewalks, limited and fractured funding sources, disconnected political jurisdictions, and providers who might have competing priorities or goals. So our report today documents these challenges, offers solutions, in fact, 32 of them you will be learning about, at least some of those today. And we are strongly convinced that even small changes can lead to dramatic gains in the mobility for those who most need it. As some of the media reports highlighted, a transportation network that works for some of us works better for all of us. And so that curb cut effect that's been documented through business school case studies is truly something that we know. We make these changes, it will help lots of people today and more in the future. MPC's vision and mission is of a better, bolder, more equitable future for everyone. And tackling these issues today is a really big part of that. I'd like to bring up to the podium Pete Mesha, who is our partner from White & Company and a sponsor of today's luncheon. Thank you so much to Pete and the White & Company team.
Thanks, Mary Sue. So I'm Pete Mesha with White & Company. White & Company is an architectural engineering and construction company. We're well known for providing design-led, design-build services in the Chicagoland area. But I think what makes us unique is our transportation practice, and particularly our emerging mobility team within White & Company. And so, as one of many transportation professionals here today, I'm expecting to feel a little bit guilty by the end of this, as Audrey moderates this team, and we learn about, or reminded of all the social injustices that are caused by a lack of mobility in our neighborhoods and communities. So I think this is very important, and your attendance certainly speaks to that. So enjoy the program. Audrey.
Hi, I'm Audrey Wenink. I'm the Director of Transportation for the Metropolitan Planning Council, and we are so excited to see all of you today. There's already been so much interest in the report in just the past couple of days, and it shows that this is a topic that people really care about, and that we need to be having this conversation. As MPC delved into this issue, it became clear, based on talking to people and looking at the numbers, that just about everybody is going to face disability at some point in their lifetimes, either themselves or as a caregiver. People may experience mobility issues as they age, or they may experience them sooner with a medical diagnosis or a serious injury. The point here is that we need to look at our transportation system much more holistically. We need to make sure that not only do our transit systems work the best they can for everyone, but also that all the supporting elements are in place, from sidewalks to signs to online information. We need to do a better job about thinking about the transportation experience from the user perspective. And that's really how we approached this report. These are pictures of people that we feature in the profiles in the report. You'll see their pictures in the report that you have in front of you. And their stories really informed our recommendations. Please raise your hand if you're one of our profile subjects. Several of them are with us here in the room today. Thank you so much for telling your stories. Their stories show both the extent to which public transit is a lifeline to having a productive and engaged life, and also highlight some of the gaps that keep it from working as well as it could. For example, Vicky, who's shown here with the fur hat, she was diagnosed with a mobility disorder in midlife. Now her body is much weaker than it used to be, and she needs to minimize walking in order to commute on Metro to get to the platforms. And so she really appreciates any accommodations that can help her do that. Michelle Lee has used a wheelchair since she was injured in a car crash. She's a finance professional who lives in the West Loop and depends on the CTA bus line that gets her to work daily, but laments that not all CTA rail stations are accessible. Jamal, who's sitting right in the middle of the room there, he's blind and uses PACE buses all the time to get around the region, and Saturday bus service is really important to him. Andrew lost his sight in midlife, but is still able to work as a successful lawyer and commute downtown via Metro every day. Audible signs are a really big deal for him. Kathy has cognitive disabilities and is able to live in a group home and get to her vocational work program via PACE bus. Transit allows her to lead an active and an independent life. Andre uses a wheelchair after being a victim of gun violence in his teens. He's an entrepreneur now, often on tight deadlines, and he makes use of the accessible transportation that Lyft and Uber provide. And Adam is a crackerjack disability advocate who's going to be joining us on our a panel in a minute, and you'll get to hear a lot more from him. So what is universal mobility? We looked at this from a couple perspectives. First of all, universal design. Many of you who are architects in the room are probably familiar with this term. This is the concept that an environment can be accessed, understood, and used to the greatest extent possible by all people, regardless of their age or disability. We also looked at it from the perspective of community mobility. This is a term used by occupational therapists, which really means that transportation enables participation in the things we want and need to do. We arrived at the term universal mobility for the report based on the belief that mobility is a human right and that access to high-quality, accessible transportation for people of all ages and abilities is fundamental to exercising that right. So how many people are actually affected by these issues? Here we see how the likelihood of disability increases with age. Overall, 7% of the population experiences a disability, but over the age of 65, 1/3 of all people have a disability. Think about how much this impacts people to engage in a satisfying and productive life and get around the region. There's also a major economic component to transportation challenges faced by people with disabilities. In a nutshell, if you have a disability, you're much less likely to have a full-time job. People with disabilities live in households with lower incomes. Just over half of people working age with disabilities live in households with a median income of less than $25,000 a year. People with disabilities are less likely to have vehicles because they may not physically be able to drive or because of their incomes. It can be a vicious cycle. People need transportation alternatives. You're all familiar with the region's transit system from the standpoint of CTA, Metro, and PACE, our 3 service boards. But what isn't as well known is the different paratransit services that are provided in this region. This includes ADA paratransit, which is the federally required service required along existing CTA and PACE transit corridors. There's non-ADA paratransit, which is generally provided at the county or municipal level. There are also PACE dial-a-rides, which are demand response transit in areas not dense enough to have fixed route transit. One of the main findings of our report is at the regional level, we have a very fractured accessible transportation system with over 50 providers, as you see in this map. Over decades, all these services have been established to address very specific needs, but they're rarely planned or operated in a coordinated way. When looking at the system holistically, it immediately becomes clear that from a rider perspective, understanding and using these systems is often difficult. So now let's talk about some of the solutions. You all have a copy of the executive summary of the report at your seats. I also do want to encourage you to go to our website and look at the full-length report. There is a much longer report that is just chock full of examples, resources, and cases that we hope will be a resource for you for months to come as we work on these issues. Now I'm going to walk through a few of the 32 recommendations we developed based on analyzing data, reviewing literature, and talking to nearly 100 people throughout the region. And I also want to thank everyone who helped us develop the report, including the transit agencies. Many of you are in the room today. Our first set of recommendations is to improve coordination among transit services. In the Chicago Tribune piece that ran yesterday, Mary Wisniewski called the accessible transportation in our region a puzzle that's missing a few pieces. Our top recommendation is establishment of a regional mobility coordinator, which could even be an individual position or a council. By coordinating better across agencies and geographies, a mobility coordinator can help fill in those missing puzzle pieces. The whole idea is promoting customer-centered mobility strategies to advance good health, economic vitality, self-sufficiency, and community. Like all of us, riders with disabilities need high-quality information as they're using transit. Many of us are using transit planning apps all the time, but they don't include real-time information on elevator and escalator outages. They don't reroute a rider who can't use stairs to a station that has working facilities. We need to work toward having real-time data on these elements consistently incorporated into trip planning apps. Nobody likes being stranded on an L platform. We have an extensive transit system. This is one of the best things about our region. And the right signage can make all the difference in finding our way. Consistent sign formats can help people navigate by recognizing patterns, even if their vision doesn't allow them to decipher words. Signs are most useful if they're tactile and audible too. CTA, Metro, and PACE should continue to work together on the RTA-issued Interagency Design Standards Manual to standardize informational signage. Ideally, the same information is located in the same location at all stations and at stops. We all know that Uber and Lyft have changed the transportation game. They enable spontaneity and independence for seniors and people with disabilities, especially in locations and at times where transit is less frequent. But people with disabilities who need a wheelchair-accessible vehicle often wait a long time for their rides to show up or have rides canceled. With any new type of service or technology, policies need to be established to ensure equivalent service for people with and without disabilities. In recent years, technology has changed so many things in transportation for the better, and now it's time to make those upgrades to paratransit. PACE, our region's ADA paratransit provider, is planning improvements using funding that was just received via the capital bill that was passed in June of this year. This will enable smarter, faster, and easier rides. This includes updated vehicle dispatching software for better routing and more efficient rides, real-time information that will be available on riders' cell phones, and the ability to make reservations and cancellations online, because some of us don't like to wait on the phone on hold. Transportation is more than just a bus. It's everything between your door and your seat on the vehicle. This is an actual photo that we took. We call it the bus stop island. While PACE has gone to great effort to have buses that can accommodate wheelchairs and to provide a shelter and a concrete pad, here the local municipality has not provided any sidewalks connecting to the bus stop, which prevents safe, meaningful access, especially if you're in a wheelchair or use a mobility device. In fact, we conducted data analysis of every PACE bus stop in the region and found that only 10% had a complete sidewalk network within a quarter mile of the bus stop. This type of fractured service is all over the region. With CTA, Metro, and PACE, we're so lucky to have a great legacy transportation network that only regions can only dream of, but we need to work harder to make this a real option for people with disabilities. and the elderly, many of whom have limited incomes. Walkable areas with good access to transit are often expensive places to live. We need to establish policies to ensure there is accessible and affordable housing near transit so people can use the fixed route system, which offers more spontaneity and flexibility than paratransit. Our research also found that the way we fund and organize much of the paratransit system in the suburbs is a problem. In most of the Chicago region suburban communities, each town contributes different levels of funding towards paratransit and can set different rules for which rides people can take. And not all towns participate, so only some people get this service. McHenry County used to have fragmented paratransit service, but over the past decade, they worked together with their local communities to create a centralized service that is consistent for everyone. In the end, they found communities save money and residents have better transportation. People with disabilities want to live full lives. We need to unleash the power of the disability community to tell their stories and guide us on the path to change. Access Living, our region's top disability advocacy organization, had great success this spring during the legislative session when a group of advocates went to Springfield multiple times to communicate their needs for paratransit upgrades, and they got them. Now there will be upgrades to the dispatching software, and people will be able to check their paratransit vehicles on their cell phones. This is really exciting. As we have been talking to people with disabilities, and we have been stunned by the often simple but game-changing ideas they have to improve their mobility. There's no substitute for people that know the system inside and out. We need to include them, partner with them, tell their stories, and continue to upgrade our transportation system to get closer to universal mobility. As people often say, the report is not the end, it's just the beginning. Now we need to implement it. MPC will be working to get the word out on this issue to decision makers and stakeholders throughout the region. We will help show how universal mobility is a core quality of life issue for a large part of our population. We can make our system better, close the gaps, and unleash opportunity for many of our region's residents. We're so excited you're all here and look forward to partnering with you in the months to come. Thank you, and now we're going to move to our panel conversation. So I'm going to bring up Risa Rivkind, who is the Director of Civic Engagement and Marketing at ADA 25 Advancing Leadership, along with other panelists. She's going to be moderating, and we'll get this party started. Okay.
Hi everyone, I'm Risa. Wow, that is loud. I'm excited to get us going on this great panel that will share even more information, and thank you Audrey for getting us started. So I'm Risa, as Audrey said, and I wanted to briefly take this moment to tell you a little bit about advancing leadership and our connection to opportunity to moving towards universal mobility. So advancing leadership vision is that people with disabilities will lead with power and influence. That includes having people with disabilities. Our member network right now is over 115 leaders with disabilities, and having those members at tables of decision making to make our region better. And so we look forward to having opportunities to connecting more of our members to RTA, CTA, PACE, and more. So looking forward to that partnership. I think a lot of information was already shared. This is a really exciting time to be talking about transportation in the context of a human right. That it's our right as people with disabilities to have access to transportation, and that transportation will be better for everyone. Quick note, logistically, we will be taking questions from the audience. So please get ready with your questions by writing them down on the index cards on your table. Please write neatly because I will have to read them. So help me out. And I want to turn it over to our panelists to get us going. In the context of looking at transportation as a human right, I want all of us to quickly say what transportation we use. Because I think it's important too to keep that in mind. Their bios, all impressive, are in your program. So I don't want to go too much into their bios, but maybe to get us started, Audrey, do you want to go?
Sure, hi. I've already introduced myself. The transportation that I use, I ride CTA, rail, and buses. I bike, and I walk, and I drive rarely.
Hi everyone, I'm Jackie Forbes from Kane County Division of Transportation and also a mobility manager for Ride in Kane. I use transportation, unfortunately I only have the option to drive to work. It's 20 minutes from my house, which is good. However, I do come downtown about 5 times a month and I take the Metro and I generally just walk from the station to wherever I need to go.
Hi, I'm Judy Shanley, and I work at the National Office of Easter Seals, which happens to be here in Chicago. And I'm also a project director on FTA-funded national center called the National Center for Mobility Management. And I am what you call a choice rider. I have not driven a car, owned a car in 7 years. And I use every mode of transportation that I can get, I can find, and I've been patient and resourceful over my life in terms of using different transit options.
Good afternoon. Adam Ballard. I am the Housing and Transportation Policy Analyst at Access Living in Chicago. You may have heard us mentioned once or twice in the opening. And also, I did not intend to wear the same shirt that I wore in the photo on the slide. I do own more than one shirt. Make sure you all know that. So I currently live in the city. I live in the Pilsen neighborhood. I feel very supported by my elected officials because my county commissioner and my state rep are both here. Thank you. And as a Pilsen resident, I use CTA. I also do use ADA paratransit. I roll to work in my chair when it's nice out. I primarily access the PACE ADA system currently through the Taxi Access Program right now, which is a subsidy that allows me to use city cabs at the paratransit rate. So those are the transportation systems I currently use. I also, before living in the city, lived in Will and DuPage counties, so I used PACE Fixed Route and Metro as well.
Thank you. Yeah, and not that anyone might care, but I too live in the city, and I don't often use transportation to get to and from work because I live 8 blocks away from my office, and I use my scooter, but I do use CTA and Metro when we have regional meetings, so I have a lot of experience there. But why don't we get into the heart of what we're talking about, and maybe we can start with Judy. I want to look at, on a national level, you know, how does universal mobility look like, are there models, and kind of what can we work toward locally?
Sure. I always say to people when I'm doing workshops or presentations that I have the best job in the world because I get to learn from other places and other models across the country and internationally occasionally and bring them back home. And Easter Seals, I'm really proud to live in Chicago. I think we're not different from other major cities like Boston and New York. When I think about those cities that are touted as models in, when we speak with the Federal Transit Administration and other entities, I think of 3 things. One being innovation. The cities are not afraid to explore new options and test new ways of providing service. They're innovative and integrated. They're integrating in partners, having new and different partners, public and private partners, partners across varying agencies, housing and urban development, Department of Labor, labor resources. All of those partners are part of those models that seem to really propel cities in having an integrated framework. And then finally, those cities that seem to be doing really well in terms of the coordination, they're inclusive. And as was said in the opening, individuals with disabilities are at the table in planning, operations, evaluation. And I think those are the three key elements associated with what makes a integrated city.
Great, and I know that through your work, you help to provide technical assistance to state and regions to help them better coordinate transportation services and build mobility management network. Can you tell us what that means and what that looks like and what you found through that work?
My passion, mobility management, and the definition was shared. And in our national center, we work to build capacity at the state, the regional, and the local levels to coordinate services. And what mobility management does, it creates efficiencies. It creates opportunities for cross-agency funding. It creates opportunities for new partnerships and new modes of transportation. There's a federal initiative right now, and many of you have probably heard it. It's called the Coordinating Council on Access and Mobility. And they've recently met, and this is an initiative where 11 federal agencies that have anything to do with transportation funding or services are required through our federal legislation, the FAST Act, to coordinate the service. And there was just a meeting in Washington a couple weeks ago, and I think you're going to be seeing more initiatives and activities, but it's really a way to bring this federal effort, and there's 133 programs across 11 agencies that can support transportation. And so I think what it's going to do is help us in the transit side to make the services we provide more efficient, more effective, high quality, because we're bringing in resources from other places.
So let's get a little more local. Maybe, Jackie, you can help kind of paint the picture of what we look like locally as a region. And, you know, county to county, we have so many differences, but I know in Kane, and you were mentioning beforehand that a lot of counties share similar pain points, if I will. So can you tell us about what we look like locally?
Sure. When we talk about a fragmented service, each of the collar counties, we all have different programs like Ride in Kane, MC Ride, Ride DuPage that provide services for our residents. However, we're not all set up the same way. And when we talk about fragmentation, I'll talk about Kane County, we have local sponsors who allow riders to register with them, and then we provide the service to them. But because they are putting up a local match to federal funds that pay for the service, they can determine what types of rides they cover. One municipality might cover any type of ride. Another municipality may only provide rides that are medical related. We also do not have the entire county covered by Ride in Kane service because we do not have sponsors in the western part of our county. So we have residents who have a need where we have no fixed route PACE service. We do have a few Metro stops, but not far enough out to help those people. So we are not covered fully in our region. And one of the real troubles that we have is particularly when people move. They will move, say, from Elburn to St. Charles or St. Charles to St. Charles Township. They actually have two different eligibility criteria that they use, and that's a real challenge. And a person will call and say, oh, I live here, and then they'll say, you're in St. Charles Township, and they say, what are you talking about? My mailing address says St. Charles. I live in St. Charles. Well, you don't, and it's different. And we have that in a couple places in our county, and I know other counties have the same issues where the local agency, which is their right to choose what type of rides they provide, it's different from county to county, and it's different from municipality to municipality. So it really is a fragmented system because you can't count on it being the same when you move around in the counties.
And because of this fragmentation, one of the key recommendations of the report is a mobility service coordinator. Maybe Audrey, can you tell us, I know you mentioned it in your presentation, but can you tell us a little bit more of what we hope that will look like county to county and then as a council coordinator?
Yeah, well, when you think about it, transportation is managed by a really wide range of different agencies. We have DOTs that manage roads. We have transit agencies that manage the vehicles. We have municipalities that manage the sidewalks. We have information provided in different places. And it's really hard. We have the RTA is passing federal funds through to different agencies. And there's much more than that. There's also the federal agencies that were just referenced, over 100 federal agencies which have representatives in the region, but that's Social Security, that's Medicaid. Those are all funding sources that are fragmented as well. And so we would view a mobility coordinator as somebody who can start to see the connections and the gaps between all of these services and help to figure out how to solve some of those problems. That individual or that function also could be a real leader in innovation, potentially helping to establish pilots and public-private partnerships and evaluating them, as has been done in other regions. So that person could really be a point person at the regional level, and then ideally then also working with people like Jackie, mobility coordinators at the county level, to make sure that information is much easier to use and that we're really streamlining our services. As the example that I gave for McHenry County, they actually kind of took a situation like is in King County and took it to the next level and made it so every person in the eastern side of Kane County, the eastern side of McHenry, they're going to expand it to the whole county. Every person has the exact same service now in that county for non-ADA paratransit. And so somebody that can sort of see the 30,000-foot view can help to start to address some of these things and make those connections.
And do we have all of the data available to start making this happen, or is there a lack of data that we can work towards getting?
Yeah, data is certainly part of the problem, especially when you look at, for example, communities and the extent to which they are compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Federally, every municipality is supposed to have what we call an ADA transition plan, which is a plan to show how they're going to transition their infrastructure to be ADA compliant. Right now in this region, we do not know who has plans, what year they were done, and what they contain. We don't have comprehensive information on that. Another really revealing example is we did not, until this year, have a database of where all the sidewalks were in this region. We've had data on where the highways were for like 50 years. And we just now have data on where the sidewalks are because the CMAP collected that data. So, but that does not, that was done from aerial photography. That does not actually include ADA aspects to it. So that's a great base. And then now we need to add on details about where there are ADA compliant elements and where they're missing and what gaps we need to fill.
Great. And I want to maybe shift gears a little bit to get some comments from Adam as well, because I did lead off very strongly about advancing leadership and incorporating intentionally people with disabilities in the decision-making tables, but also in the planning stages is very important too. And shout out to a few of our members who were featured in the profiles, including Michelle Lee, who I know is back there, Audrey Johnson, Andrew Webb, and also Adam Ballard. Adam, can you tell us a little bit about the importance of and how to make sure we're including people with disabilities who are riders of these systems along the way?
Yeah, definitely. I also want to back up just for a second and just add to the coordinator role. We think it's really important. We think it's a great recommendation. We also want to make sure that any mobility coordinator or coordinators who are tying these services together, filling in some of these gaps, are keeping in mind that, yes, we need to do innovative things that save money, like working with private companies in that space, if that's what it takes. But we also have to make sure that in doing so, we make sure that the services being provided are themselves accessible for everyone. And that might sound like a no-brainer, but it's not, because a lot of the private companies are still fighting in court their right to not comply with the ADA, right? So keeping that in mind and also being cognizant of the fact that not all of the private providers, the TNCs, are created equal. Some of them are much more proactive in this space than others. Making sure that the agreements we enter into are very clear on the expectations that they will provide service for everyone is really important. And that means, again, just to be a little more clear, I always like to make sure I'm as clear as possible, providing wheelchair accessible vehicles for those who need them. Not everyone with a disability needs one, and that's fine, but you're leaving people behind if you're not providing that level of service. So making sure that our our P3s, or private-public partnerships, are very clear that unless a wheelchair user has the same user experience as a blind person or a non-disabled person, then we're not doing it right? If I have to wait 20 minutes for my wheelchair accessible ride, but my friend who is not mobility impaired only has to wait 3 or 4 minutes, then we're not doing it right. We don't have a system that's working the same for everyone, and that's a 2-track system, and we can't do that. So that said, coming back to what you asked me, Risa, sorry.
No, please, thank you.
And I think that speaks to what you're asking about, though. Why is it important for users' voices to be part of the design of these systems? Because if they're not, those things happen. And some of the private-public partnerships we know about are working really well and haven't had those problems. Some of them are working really poorly and do have those problems. And from where we can see, the difference is those processes that included us from the very beginning work well, and those where we're consulted after the fact, after the deal's been done, after the ink is dry, that's when the problems come up in the rollout, right? So bring us into the process from the beginning. When you're designing what that partnership's gonna look like, have us at the table. And by us, I mean people with a wide variety of disabilities. Because I think another group of folks that we're not talking about a whole lot, that maybe aren't even represented here as much today, are people with intellectual disabilities, people with neurological disabilities. Their access needs are completely different than mine, but they're no less valid, and they still need to be accommodated and make sure that their user experience is the same as mine as well. So including stakeholders with a wide variety of disabilities at the table before the agreements are even in place is really important. And I think that there are examples of that happening here in the region. PACE, their ADA paratransit, they've been beat up a lot over the years, to be honest, by our community. But recently, they've made a concerted effort, I think, to re-engage our community and have us at the table before some of these big decisions are made. And we are noticing that. So that is one example of how to do it right. The CTA also, for a while now, has been, I would say, pretty deeply engaged with the riders with disabilities, and that has improved their service. We need to see that from all of the service boards, but again, all the other players in the transit space. We can't just think that transit in the region anymore is the 3 service boards. It's obviously not. It's Uber, it's Lyft, it's the cabs, it's Via, it's everyone who is operating in the act of moving people around our city and region is part of the system now. And they need to be engaged in the same way, and they need to be engaging us in the same way.
Please, Judy wants to add something.
Yeah, we've seen at the national level some really great examples of where individuals with disabilities have been involved in performance measurement and measuring outcomes. And I think this also relates to the question about data. We have to do a good job collectively, all of us, on measuring outcomes associated with transportation, whether we're looking at health outcomes and when a transportation service can ensure that people can access health care in prevention ways or follow-up care and stay out of hospitals. What does that mean in terms of economic development? Housing, can people access safe living situations because of transportation, and how do they get around to jobs? We've got to measure outcomes associated with what we do, and I know it's not easy, but the places around the country that are trying to facilitate efficiency of their service and bring in new partners are really thinking about that ROI, and I think we could do that too in Chicagoland.
So funding is a pretty consistent transportation or other areas piece of conversation. Is there any low-hanging fruit to pretty quickly grow our pool of funds that we have available?
I'll jump in on that one. I think we need to recognize that we did just have this capital bill passed this year, and counties and communities are going to be getting more money from gas taxes, and we need to make sure that that new revenue is upgrading our system as we go, that it's making it more accessible and safer as we make those investments. I think we also, we really do, the bottom line is we do spend a lot of money on transportation already, and it is a lot about choices and priorities. And we really need to just look at where our priorities are. We know that there are some counties that are not spending all of their RTA sales tax on transportation. That is revenue that could be used to fund these types of services and could really transform a lot of lives. So I think it's really a question of priorities in a lot of ways.
Going back to the Coordinating Council on Access Mobility, the Federal Department of Health and Human Services at this meeting a couple weeks ago in DC, and Adam and I were both at that meeting, HHS talked about being able to use HHS funds to match some of the FTA, the Federal Transit Administration monies, and vice versa. And so I think with this push to coordinate across federal sectors and then state agencies that are also representative of those federal sectors, and the programs and the grants that those federal agencies fund at our local and regional levels, I think there's opportunities to tap into some of those funds that maybe people don't know about, that those particular programs can fund transportation.
Great. So there's a great diversity of people in the room, from decision makers, legislators, transportation users, and more. Can we think about what do we want to pitch right now to make transportation accessible to all, and how can we ask everyone in the room to help us do that?
Adam, do you want to start?
You start.
Okay. I think that this is really a lot about how we make our communities resilient and competitive and enduring multi-generational communities where people can age in place. I think many elected officials, I understand, are hearing a lot about this from their residents more and more recently. And in fact, the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus has actually just started an Aging in Place committee, which is reflective of the urgency of this issue. So I think we need to stop viewing this as a marginalized problem, but a central problem to our community's health and sustainability. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think that we have a unique moment. I think this report speaks to that moment, and hopefully this report and the conversations that are starting today will kind of seize this moment. But we have this moment where there's so much influx. And I don't just mean in Chicago or the region, I mean around the country, right? There's so much influx about how we move people around. And it's really potentially, depending on where technology takes us, it's potentially as revolutionary a moment as when we switched from horse-drawn carriages to the automobile 120 years ago. And that moment completely changed everything. It changed the faces of our cities and our communities. And we could see potentially that level of change over the next 10, 20 years as these services and technologies advance and change the way we think about moving people and things around. Our focus today is, of course, on people, and specifically disabled people. 120 years ago, there wasn't a disability movement of any kind. We didn't have any kind of consciousness of ourselves as a community with a voice, with power at that time, right? This time around we do. And if we really are gonna really completely change the way we move people around in the coming decades, our community needs to be at the table as those decisions are made. Because there's no reason why we can't get it right this time. Why we can't design transportation systems that are seamless for literally everyone. The only thing that would hold us back is if we don't have the right voices at the table, we don't have the right people involved in the decision making. And that means, again, it means sharing power with each other. It means trusting each other, trusting that our community has something important to say that will benefit more than just our community, because it's true. Access benefits everyone. If we make a fully accessible transportation system, that hurts literally no one, and it benefits literally everyone. So there's no downside to getting this right. So let's take this moment over the next few years and get it right.
I just want to add on to that, and for everyone in the room, what Risa said, what can we all be working on? And I'm really excited that this plan is called Universal Mobility, because that's the way we need to think about it, is that it's for everybody. Everything that we're doing will benefit everyone, and why do we have to talk about these separate systems when really it is just one system? One of the pictures we saw was the Island bus stop. Having a sidewalk there will help everyone get there. I mean, would you be pushing your child's stroller through the grass, trying to get to the bus stop? No. What if it was snowing or rainy? It's really just looking at it as, how do we get to the bus stop? How do we get to the train station? How do we get up to the next level on the CTAL platform? It's for everybody. So if we start thinking about it as a universal mobility rather than a specialized mobility, that's what we need to be thinking about, and that's where we should just be focusing our efforts now.
I always go back to the data issue and the return on investment of all of this. The impact of transportation on people's health, on economic development in a community. I was at a meeting in a rural part of Minnesota, and there was a chief of police sitting in this coordination. It was interdisciplinary, human services sitting next to aging, sitting next to transit providers, and there was a chief of police, and I said, what's your interest in this? And he said, if people in his community don't have transportation to access meaningful places to go, jobs, services, adult services, they stay on the streets and do bad things. That, so it affects us all, and that's the notion of universal mobility.
Those were all terrific long-term goals, right? We know what it could look like. We have to get there. It's almost 2020, which is the anniversary of the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. What is something you hope we see concretely happen in 2020? And then I think we're going to switch to questions from the audience. So if you can answer that, and then I'll look for the questions.
I think something we could do is do a study where we collect all the ADA transition plans for all the communities and get a better baseline of where we are, so we know what the gaps are that we're filling.
I think I'm going to build upon that idea a little bit and try and work more closely with our municipal partners and have them look at the same information. Audrey mentioned CMAP sidewalk inventory that's now available to them. It's a lot easier to take a look at what's out there, and they can create their own database, not only just so they can inform their residents about what the conditions of sidewalks are in their communities, but also prioritize them and be ready for when those federal funds come, and so that they can start making improvements. They know exactly where to focus their efforts first.
As the National Center, one of the things that we're doing, and Jerome Tunison, my colleague, is here from Easter Seals, is we're developing state profiles to understand in those states like Ohio and Wisconsin, Iowa, that are well known for having mobility management networks and coordinated networks. What is it they're doing to make it work? Top down, bottom up, what kind of governance exists, what kind of funding exists, and then the ROI piece, the outcomes piece. So that's what we'll be working on.
I wasn't necessarily planning on being this specific, but I think that in 2020, especially because the ball's already rolling, it needs to keep rolling, we have an opportunity to show that a truly integrated transportation system can work in at least part of the region if we make the South Side Transit Project happen and we connect the South Side to the south suburbs through Metra, through the CTA, and PACE. Paratransit has a role to play there too, to get people first mile, last mile, people with disabilities. A lot of the reasons why people point to, well, why is transit ridership so low on the west side, the south suburbs? Why is car use so high? Part of the reason is people don't feel safe at those transit stations. Another reason for my community is half those transit stations aren't accessible. So let's take that project seriously first, and let's use it as an opportunity to show that coordinated service with all the players that we've mentioned can work, and it can work starting next year on the south side and then the south suburbs here.
So we have a whole bunch of questions here, and please feel free to keep them rolling. There are other NPC staff walking around. This question says, how about hiring of people with disabilities as planners, transportation, designers, and policymakers? Can you talk about how prioritizing employment of people with disabilities will yield better access?
Yes. Sorry. I'm being whispered to that I should answer this question, and I didn't think I was answering any questions, but I can. So the question was about hiring people with disabilities as planners, transportation, designers, policy workers. Yes. I also feel like people with disabilities are also too in those jobs, and I would love to see more people in leadership positions also start to identify as having a disability and then get connected to more people with disabilities. But of course, there's a long way to go because we know that people with disabilities are underemployed or unemployed at much higher rates than people without disabilities. I think that if we make that a priority as the question asked, it will make systems better because people who are using those systems with disabilities are designing and planning and fixing the system. So if our voices are included as employees, even more powerful. Does anyone want to add anything to that?
Risa usually says things better than me, and it was the case again just now. But yeah, I mean, we're out here, right? There's people with disabilities with lived experience who have knowledge, firsthand knowledge of the systems we use, but then also some of us have gone, professionally or through education or otherwise, to learn more about how planning works, and we're out here. And we should be helping run these programs. That's really what I meant when I said we should be at the table, is we should be in positions of actual power, which usually means a job, honestly. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it means a really well-constructed task force or committee, but it often means jobs. So yeah, we absolutely need to be at the table in that way as well. And I'll just echo what Risa said about getting more leaders to self-identify. We talk a lot about the data, and I think data is really important, but data on disability is really difficult because so much of it comes from self-identification. And there's such a strong stigma around disability still that we know the numbers are way short. There's no way only 7% of the people in this region have a disability. I just know that's objectively wrong. But that's the number we have because that's all the people who will admit to it. So we need to end that stigma by showing that we value people by hiring them and promoting them.
Thanks. So this is actually a concept that I talked to someone about last week. And the question is, can you please discuss the first mile, last mile issue? If one thing could get to the station, but then what? And I too have, seen this of the reverse way. I can get to a metro station, but then I can't get to my meeting location sometimes in other counties. So anyone want to try and tackle this question?
This is a perennial problem in our region for people with disabilities and not with disabilities. I think the potential exists for services like Lyft, Uber via demand response services to play a greater role in this. And we are seeing some of that, and there can be partnerships with transit agencies where there are incentives to combine the transit ride with the last mile. So I think we can do a better job of packaging those types of services. There's also opportunity for using paratransit as a first mile, last mile type of access program. And one of our recommendations is to better coordinate paratransit with fixed route services so that those combinations are more possible, where the long trip is on the transit and the short trip is on paratransit.
We were working with Flint, Michigan, and the CEO, Ed Benning, will often comment that there's not one size vehicle to fit all situations, and he's being creative and innovative and using different transportation modes for that first last mile solution, like volunteer driver programs. The transit agency established a volunteer driver program using partnerships with Uber, Lyft, and there's many other of those kind of private providers, but not thinking that a big bus is the only solution for that first mile, last mile issue.
And don't forget sidewalks.
Audrey, I think this is a question for you. Does the proposed plan include how to ensure that accessible options are known by users, for example, collaborating with private companies, Google Maps, or other to share more information more broadly?
Yeah, one of the recommendations is to develop a centralized information source for all the different transportation options that a person might have. There are examples of this in other places. There's a program called Go Vermont where you can plug in your origin and destination anywhere in the state. You can just plug in whether you need a wheelchair accessible vehicle, whether you're a veteran, whatever your parameters are, and you'll learn what all the options are. It's sort of called a one-click concept. So we think that's important. We also think that private transportation providers like Lyft or Uber should be required to show transit options when you request a trip, that they should show transit options as well as their first and last mile options, so that you can combine transit with last mile services.
There's a couple of questions and I'm going to combine, so apologies if I'm not getting every bullet in your excellent question, but there's an example of a member of a constituency who relies on public transport because he lives on or near the Cook and DuPage County line. When he gets picked up by one bus and dropped off to wait for another, often with a very long wait time, he has both an intellectual and a physical disability, and we want to know, is technology the only answer to long wait time, or are there other recommendations that can help shorten that waiting time?
This sounds like it's a trip provided by ADA Paratransit. Well, we are hoping that with the upgrades to the ADA Paratransit software, the routing will be much better for trips and more efficient, so that people will be able to have shorter rides. Currently, the on-time arrival parameters by federal law are a little longer than you might expect for traditional transit. It's something in the order of 20 minutes, I believe. So that is a little bit longer wait time than you might wait for a train. But I think part of it is knowing when the ride's coming. That makes the anxiety of waiting better. But also, we're hoping that if there are customer-facing tools, like being able to see your paratransit vehicle arrival time on your cell phone, then that'll allow you to not be just standing there waiting, but you can do something else and then only come to the lobby of the building when the ride is going to come, so you'll have more productive time.
And Adam, I know you and I quickly talked in our prep calls about, recognizing that technology too, though, even if it improves, there's still not all people with disabilities access technology the same way. So, I know you had thoughts about this as well.
Yeah, I think we have to think about technology in two ways. There's like a back-end technology, which does affect everybody, and I think that the advances there are important, and we need to harness that and seize that. But on the user side, the digital divide is, I think, even more stark in the disability community than it is in other impoverished communities. I know just anecdotally that dispatch services here in the city of Chicago for taxis, something like 80–90% of all of their requests come over the phone still, even though they have an app, right? So, and I'm not surprised by that. And I think that once Pace has their app up and running, they'll see similar numbers probably, right? Now, it could be argued that we could nudge those numbers a little bit farther with good, high quality apps and services, and maybe that's right. But even if that's true, I think that you'll always have at least half, and probably well more than half, of all people with disabilities aren't going to be accessing these systems through an app on a smartphone, because they aren't going to have a smartphone or be able to afford one or know how to use one. So we need to be able to make sure that on the user end, we're still offering the same level of service that someone with an app has over the phone. We need to make sure that cash is still a viable option for payment, right? We can't just have prepaid options. Addressing the digital divide in the disability community is real, and we aren't going to push that bar too much further. So we need to make sure that that the old methods of end user service are still there and are improving as well as the apps are.
And a very quick question that maybe someone knows the answer to. Is there a place where people can find the communities that have the required ADA transition plan? If that doesn't exist, is there a way to make that happen or share that at least with the audience members here?
The Great Lakes ADA Center, the ADA Center network.
Well, I know I can speak for Kane County, and ours is on our website, accessible. Just click on there, and then we're also required to do an update every year to our transition plan, which we have been doing since we did. But it is available. I would assume other counties would make them available online, so you can see what's in them.
Yeah, the Great Lakes ADA Center is another centralized source of information. We've been in conversation with them about trying to get this study done to collect all the information, but people would probably need to go to each municipality and look online individually to find the transition plans or contact the cities directly.
Okay. Do we have time for one more question or a couple more questions? Okay. Are you seeing an impact from the shortage of drivers that is a national issue?
Paratransit drivers? Well, I mean, there tends to be a lot of turnover in these types of services. So there's a lot of tension between driving for Lyft or Uber or driving for paratransit. There can be a lot of turnover, so that can certainly be a challenge. I don't know a lot of details about how hard it is. I know that PACE operates its ADA paratransit through 3 contractors, so it's really not something that PACE deals with directly as much as the contractors deal with it directly. But we do hear that these are not the highest paid jobs, and that it can be challenging to keep them filled and have consistent people, and that is hard for the riders because they get used to the same drivers, and they prefer to have consistency. So it is better if you have people in those jobs longer term.
I think this is a really important issue and question. I think that it's going to take some long-term thinking for a lot of the reasons that Audrey mentioned. It is a high turnover, and literally any driver I talk to talks about the high turnover, about how they're not paid enough, and how it doesn't matter if it's a liveried PACE driver, if it's a cab driver, if it's a TNC driver. They all feel the same way, and they're all turning over in all 3 of those sectors, right? So it's not unique to any type of service, and it does directly impact the level of service. And I think that the longer term change in thinking we need we haven't even gotten here with other workers that serve people with disabilities either, but I think we're trying. The people who drive me around are just important to my everyday life as the attendants who come in the morning and help me get dressed and ready for work, or as the direct service providers who work with people with intellectual disabilities in group homes or other settings. And until we're valuing all those workers' work, attendants, the drivers, the direct service support people, CNAs, until we're there with all of them, we're going to keep having that issue. So this does cost money, obviously, but we need to figure out ways to value, and by value I mean pay, those workers well so that the turnover hopefully slows down.
You mentioned that the Mobility Service Coordinator would try to recognize the issues and gaps in transportation in the region. What defines a region, a county, and a township?
What I envision for a regional coordinator is somebody who understands what happens at the county level and at a township level. As the mobility manager for Ride Kane, I oversee all the individual sponsors, but they still have their own staff that actually relates to each rider who registers with them and helps them when they have complaints or if they have other comments or needs. So I think of a regional coordinator would really be able to understand what's happening at each of those different levels. The county coordinator would still be able to serve as a liaison to a regional coordinator. And I think the key part of the regional coordinator, I'm just going to get in my soapbox, is it's a full-time position that's just that person's job to look at it. A lot of the people who work in my colleagues in the other counties, this is just a small portion of our job, and we can't dedicate enough time to it to try and to expand our service and do more things. And if we had a regional person and that was their only job, then yes, we could still serve as a liaison, that local person, the local voice who can talk to our local communities and find out what's going on all those levels, but just at a full time. So to me, it's just kind of this overseer person that can really look down and work with the counties, who can then work with our local sponsors and our townships on a local level. But they really have those time and resources to dedicate to the programs.
And why not full-time people at the regional level and also full-time people at the county level?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you to the panelists. I think I'm handing the mic over.
I want to just quickly wrap us up with some appreciative thanks to this talented, informative panel. Adam and Judy and Jackie, Risa, and of course my colleague Audrey Wennick. I think you can feel the passion that she has put into this research and to the work that we are not only sharing with you today, but the work ahead. Audrey's joined by our colleague Jeremy Glover. And there's a whole bunch of other colleagues in the room, MPC staff, board members, members of the committee that help guide this work. If you could raise your hand, wave to folks. If you are interested in learning a little bit more as you leave the room, any of these folks can help chat with you further. And here's what we would ask you to do. First of all, there's been a robust conversation on social media. So on both Facebook and Twitter, please help amplify, post something yourself, invite other people into this discussion, because the 150 of us in this room is a ripple effect. Our partner organizations are so critical to this work. Our former colleague Emily Blum at ADA 25 Advancing Leadership, our friends at Access Living, our partners across the government agencies that you heard referenced today, RTA, CMAP, all of the transportation providers. We're not going to be able to do this without each and every one of us. What we hope to do is to plant the seeds now, between now and the end of the year, of scheduling conversations to start the year off strong. So councils of government, professional associations, regional groups, out and around the region, we would like to bring this kind of conversation to your tables. And please invite us, please work with us to structure those conversations. And come to us with your ideas about amplifying the powerful stories that were featured today in this report and online. Just sending someone a quick link to the full report is a small step that you can do to help educate maybe your mayor, the person who's responsible for those sidewalk decisions as we think about the dollars flowing. So think about one action that you can do. It's Tuesday before the end of the week to help spread the word. We would be very grateful for that assistance, and we will be in touch with you about next steps. Thank you again to our panel, to my colleagues, to our partners. This is important work. It builds on the work of many, many other organizations that have been in the trenches for a long time on this, and we look forward to elevating the debate and accelerating the pace of change. Thank you for joining us today.